Sergeant Maya Rodriguez stood in the training courtyard of the Thraknari military academy watching 6 alien predator cubs, each the size of a large wolf with obsidian scales and crystalline claws, return from what should have been a simple pre-combat cleaning session, except they weren't just clean, they were completely covered head to tail in bubbles, soap suds sliding off their confused little faces. One cub sneezing, bubbles out of his nose, another trying to eat the foam. And Maya couldn't help but laugh because she'd told them clean up before training, thinking they'd understand basic hygiene. But these were Thraknari cubs who'd apparently interpreted her instruction as cover yourself entirely in the cleaning substance humans call soap, and the sound of her laughter made every adult Thraknari in the courtyard go silent because their warrior culture had never heard such joy in a training context, and particularly not from the human combat instructor they'd hired 3 months ago, who was supposed to be teaching their young to fight, not teaching them to become bubble-covered disasters. And Maya could feel the disapproval radiating from the 2 Thraknari commanders watching from the observation platform, the twin sisters Zarix and Kylra, both towering 8-foot warriors with matching obsidian scales but completely different demeanors. Zarix stern and traditional and clearly thinking Maya was corrupting their cubs with human nonsense, while Kylra's scales were shifting to the warm amber colors that Maya had learned meant amusement and interest. And Maya knew that the growing tension between how the sisters perceived her teaching methods was coming to a head, knew that the connection she'd been developing with both of them was about to force some kind of confrontation. But first she had to deal with 6 soap-covered predator cubs who were now slipping and sliding across the stone courtyard like the galaxy's most adorable disasters. Maya had arrived on the Thraknari homeworld as part of Earth's new cultural exchange program designed to build bridges with species humanity had recently made peace with, and she'd been assigned to teach combat tactics to young Thraknari, which had seemed straightforward until she'd met her students. Cubs ranging from age 5 to 8 in human years. Fierce little predators who'd been raised in a warrior culture that treated training as serious business, that never incorporated play or creativity or joy into martial education. And Maya had been horrified by the rigid brutality of their standard training methods, had watched cubs being punished for mistakes instead of being encouraged to learn from them, had seen the fear in their eyes when they failed to execute techniques perfectly. And she'd made a decision to teach them differently, to incorporate human concepts of positive reinforcement and making training actually enjoyable, and the cubs had responded with enthusiasm that shocked their traditional instructors. But that enthusiasm had also created conflict between the 2 commanders who supervised the academy. Zarix, the elder twin by mere minutes but superior in rank by choice, believed that Maya's methods were making the cubs soft, that incorporating play and laughter into training was undermining warrior discipline, that teaching cubs to clean up before training and then not punishing them when they misunderstood was creating weakness that would get them killed in actual combat. And she'd confronted Maya multiple times, her scales shifting to aggressive red as she'd argued that human training methods might work for soft human children, but Thraknari cubs needed harder preparation for harsher realities. And Maya had argued back, had shown statistics proving that cubs trained with positive methods actually learned faster and retained more, had pointed out that the cubs in her program showed more creativity and problem-solving than those in traditional programs. But Zarix remained unconvinced, remained certain that Maya was corrupting Thraknari culture. And Maya had noticed something else during these arguments. The way Zarix's scales would occasionally shift from aggressive red to confused purple when Maya stood her ground. The way the commander's eyes would linger on Maya's face when she thought Maya wasn't looking. The way their arguments had started feeling less like professional disagreements and more like something charged with tension that had nothing to do with training methods. Kylra, the younger twin who commanded the Academy's Special Operations Division, had taken a completely different approach to Maya, had embraced the human training methods enthusiastically, had started incorporating Maya's techniques into her own advanced combat classes, had spent hours talking with Maya about human culture and philosophy and child development, and Maya had felt a connection growing, had found herself looking forward to their conversations, had noticed the way Kylra's scales would shift to soft amber whenever Maya entered a room. And she'd started to suspect that Kylra's interest went beyond professional curiosity, that the touches that lingered slightly too long and the invitations to private dinners and the way Kylra looked at her weren't just friendly, but were something more. And Maya had been carefully not acknowledging this, because getting involved with an alien commander seemed like a terrible idea professionally and personally, but she couldn't deny that she felt drawn to Kylra, drawn to her warmth and her curiosity and her willingness to challenge her own culture's assumptions. The soap bubble incident became the catalyst that forced everything into the open, because as Maya helped the cubs rinse off, laughing and making it a game, teaching them about soap and water and hygiene in ways that actually made sense to their predator minds, Zarek stormed down from the observation platform and said in a voice that made every cub freeze in fear, "Instructor Rodriguez, this is unacceptable. You have turned combat training into a circus. You have made our cubs into jokes. You have undermined generations of Thrak-Nari warrior tradition with your human softness, and I am formally requesting your removal from this position." And before Maya could respond, Kylra descended from the platform and positioned herself between her sister and Maya, and her scales went full combat red as she said, "Sister, you do not speak for the entire academy. You do not have authority to remove instructors without council approval, and you are letting your personal feelings about Instructor Rodriguez cloud your professional judgment." And Zarek's scales flashed violent crimson as she said, "Personal feelings? You're the one with personal feelings, Kylra. You're the one who spends every evening with the human, who looks at her with colors I've never seen you display for anyone, who has made it obvious to everyone that you desire her. And now you're compromising academy policy to protect her. So don't speak to me about professional judgment when you've clearly lost yours." And the courtyard went dead silent because the twins had just made their private conflict very public, and the cubs were watching with wide eyes. And Maya felt her face heating with embarrassment and confusion because she'd known Kylra was interested but hadn't realized it was so obvious to everyone. And she certainly hadn't known that Zarek cared one way or another. But the way Zarek's scales were shifting from red to deep purple, the color Maya had learned indicated hurt and jealousy, suggested that maybe Zarek's opposition to Maya hadn't been purely about training methods after all. Kylra turned to Maya, and her scales shifted to vulnerable white. And she said, "Maya Rodriguez, I need to speak truth because my sister has forced the issue, and I apologize for doing this publicly, but circumstances demand honesty. I have developed what my people call kramesh, the soul bond yearning. For you, I have feelings that Thrak-Nari rarely experience and never for outsiders. And I have been courting you in the ways of my people, bringing you gifts of knowledge, spending time in your presence, synchronizing my scale colors to your preferences. And I thought you understood, thought you were responding, thought we were building towards something, but perhaps I misread human signals. Perhaps what I interpreted as reciprocation was just your natural kindness. And Maya, I need to know, do you feel anything for me, or have I been fooled?" Maya stood there dripping wet from helping rinse cubs, her hair plastered to her head, her training clothes soaked. And she felt completely unprepared for this moment, for this very public declaration. But Kylra's vulnerability demanded honesty. So Maya said, "Kylra, I care about you. I value our friendship, and yes, I felt something growing between us. But I didn't know how to navigate it. Didn't know if it was allowed or appropriate or even possible given our species' differences. And I was trying to be professional, trying not to complicate an already complicated situation, but yes, I feel something for you." And before the relief could fully register on Kylra's face, Zarek made a sound like breaking stone and said, "Of course you do. Of course my sister gets what she wants as always. Kylra, who is beloved by everyone. Kylra, who adapts so easily. Kylra, who takes to human methods like she was born to them, while I, who have devoted my entire life to duty and tradition and proper Thrak-Nari ways, I am seen as obstacle, as problem, as the sister who doesn't matter." And Maya saw Zarek's scales shift to pure black, the color of absolute despair. And she understood suddenly that this was about so much more than training methods or professional disagreement. This was about two sisters who'd been competing their entire lives, who'd been taught that only one could be superior. And Zarex had been losing that competition to Kilra in every way that mattered to her. And Maya, the human who'd come to teach cubs, had become another prize in their eternal rivalry. Maya did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She walked past Kilra and straight to Zarex and said, "Commander, with respect, you're wrong about almost everything you just said. You're not an obstacle or a problem. You're a commander who cares deeply about doing things right, about maintaining standards, about protecting your cubs from what you perceive as harmful influences. And yes, we disagree about training methods. Yes, I think your traditional approaches are too harsh. But Zarex, I've also watched you with those cubs when you think no one is looking. I've seen the way you check on them after training, the way you personally ensure they have adequate nutrition, the way you memorize every one of their names and their individual challenges. And that's not the behavior of someone who doesn't care. That's the behavior of someone who loves fiercely but doesn't know how to show it except through strictness and standards. And Zarex, I respect that. I respect you. And if you feel like your sister is taking something from you, if you feel like you're losing a competition for my attention or affection, then we need to talk about the actual problem, which isn't the training methods. It's the way your culture has taught you that sisters must compete instead of collaborate, that there can only be one winner, that caring about the same person means one of you loses. And Zarex stared at Maya with scales shifting through a dozen colors. And finally she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "You see me. You actually see me beyond the strict commander exterior, and human Maya Rodriguez. I must confess something that brings me great shame. I have also developed Kramesh for you. I have fought it because it felt like weakness, because I thought attraction to an outsider betrayed my duty, because I couldn't bear that once again my sister would have something I wanted. But watching you laugh with those cubs, watching you see value in methods I dismissed, watching you treat everyone with dignity regardless of their status or their agreement with you, I began to understand that perhaps strength isn't what I thought it was. Perhaps my rigidity was brittleness. Perhaps your flexibility was actual strength. And I found myself drawn to you, found myself wanting to understand you, found myself jealous not just of my sister, but of the easy way you connect with others, the joy you bring to spaces that have never known joy, and I don't know what to do with these feelings. Don't know how to compete with my sister who is naturally warm where I am cold, naturally beloved where I am respected, but not liked." The courtyard remained silent except for the sound of dripping water and the soft, confused mewling of soap-covered cubs. And Kylra's scales shifted through emotions that Maya was learning to read. And finally, Kylra said, "Sister, we are doing it again. We are competing for something precious instead of sharing it. We are treating this human as prize to be won instead of person to be honored with choice. And I am tired of our rivalry. I am tired of measuring my worth by whether I have more than you or you have more than me. And Zarex, I propose something radical, something that would require us both to change. What if we stopped competing? What if we went to Maya together and asked if human hearts are large enough to hold two very different Thraknari who both admire her, who both want to learn from her, who both feel this impossible Kramesh that our people experience once in a lifetime, if at all? Because our culture says we must compete. But Maya has taught us that human culture asks different questions, finds different solutions, and perhaps this is one of those moments where we choose the human way over the Thraknari way and see what becomes possible." Zarex's scales shifted to stunned silver, and she looked between her sister and Maya felt her heart racing, because this was spiraling into territory she'd never imagined. Because she'd come here to teach cubs to fight, and somehow she'd ended up in the middle of twin alien warriors both confessing feelings for her and proposing some kind of shared relationship. And Maya thought about protocol and professionalism and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But she also thought about how lonely she'd been since arriving on this alien world, how Kylra's warmth had felt like home, and how Zarex's hidden vulnerability had called to something protective in Maya, how she'd been developing feelings for both of them without acknowledging it even to herself. And she looked at the 6 cubs still covered in soap watching this drama unfold. And she thought about how she'd been teaching them that there were always more options than the obvious ones, that creativity and flexibility were strengths, not weaknesses. And here she was facing her own test of whether she'd practice what she preached. And she took a breath and said, "I don't know if this can work. I don't know if human Thraknari relationships are even biologically viable. I don't know how to navigate dating one alien warrior, let alone 2 who happen to be sisters. But I do know that I care about both of you. I'm drawn to Kilra's warmth and to Zarex's hidden depth. I'm attracted to your differences and how you complement each other. And if you're both serious about trying something unprecedented, about building a relationship that defies both our culture's norms, then I'm willing to try. But we have to start by getting these cubs actually clean and finishing their training, because whatever else is happening, those little ones are still our responsibility, and that comes first." The absurdity of transitioning from emotional confessions to dealing with soap-covered cubs broke the tension, and all 3 of them started laughing, and the cubs, seeing their fierce commanders actually laughing, joined in with their chirping giggles, and Maya organized them into a proper cleaning line, and Zarex surprised everyone by kneeling down and gently showing the cubs how to rinse properly. Her usual sternness softened as she worked with the smallest cub who was struggling, and Kilra worked with Maya to demonstrate proper drying techniques, and there was something beautiful about the 3 of them working together with the cubs. Something that felt like family, like possibility, like the beginning of something that could be extraordinary if they were brave enough to try. And later that evening, after the cubs had been returned to their parents and the training day had ended, Maya sat with both sisters in Kilra's private quarters, and they talked honestly about what attempting a 3-way relationship would mean, about the challenges they'd face from both their cultures, about whether they could make it work when they were so different. And Zarex admitted, "I fear that I will drive you away with my rigidity, that you will prefer my sister's easy warmth to my difficult nature." And Maya took Zarex's clawed hand carefully and said, "I don't want easy, Zarex. I want real. I want all of you, including the parts you think are difficult, because your strength and your standards and your dedication to duty, those aren't flaws. Those are what make you you, and Kilra, I'm drawn to your warmth and your adaptability, but I also see that you sometimes avoid conflict, sometimes defer to keep peace, and that's part of you too. And what I'm proposing, what we're all proposing, is that we build something where all of us can be fully ourselves, where we don't have to compete or hide parts of ourselves or pretend to be what we think the others want. We just show up honestly and figure it out together, and yes, it'll be messy like soap-covered cubs. Yes, we'll make mistakes and misunderstand each other and have to learn as we go, but that's how everything worth having is built, through trial and error and commitment, and the willingness to keep trying even when it's hard. The relationship that developed over the following months was indeed messy and complicated and beautiful, with Maya learning to navigate 2 very different personalities, with Zarex learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness and that sometimes breaking your own rules was necessary for growth, with Kilra learning that warmth without boundaries wasn't kindness and that sometimes conflict was necessary for authentic connection. And with all 3 of them learning that love across species and cultural barriers required constant communication, required willingness to explain and ask questions and acknowledge when you didn't understand, required patience with differences, and celebration of similarities and the creativity to build something that didn't exist in either species' cultural framework. And the cubs noticed the change in their commanders, noticed that Zarex smiled more, and Kilra was more assertive, and Maya seemed happier, and the training program thrived because it was being led by 3 people who were modeling what they taught, that strength and gentleness could coexist, that discipline and joy weren't opposites, that the best warriors were those who knew when to fight and when to laugh, and the cubs who graduated from Maya's program were different from previous generations, were still fierce and capable, but Also creative and emotionally intelligent and able to work in teams more effectively because they'd learned that connection was strength, not weakness. And their parents noticed, and other academies started asking about the human instructor and her revolutionary methods, and Maya's contract was extended and extended again, and she realized she was building a life on this alien world, was building a family with 2 alien warriors and 6 soap-covered cubs who visited constantly, bringing their problems and their triumphs, and their absolute certainty that Maya would have time for them. And one evening, 2 years after the soap incident, Maya sat with Zarix and Kyra watching the sunset paint the alien sky in colors Earth had never known, and Zarix said something that made Maya's heart full. My sister and I were taught from birth to compete, to measure our worth by whether we surpassed each other, and that competition poisoned our relationship for decades. But you, human Maya, you taught us that there was another way. You refused to choose between us when that choice would have destroyed us both. You insisted that we could both be valued, both be loved, both be enough, and that lesson, that radical human idea that love expands rather than divides, that has healed more than just our relationship. It has healed something in Thrakanari culture. Because the cubs you've trained are teaching their parents that collaboration is stronger than competition, that joy and discipline can coexist, that the human way of seeing people as having infinite worth rather than relative worth to each other, that's transforming how we raise our young, how we structure our society, how we understand strength. And Maya, you did this not by grand speeches or by force. You did it by laughing at soap-covered cubs, by refusing to choose between sisters, by insisting that there were always more options than we'd been taught to see. Maya felt tears pricking her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from being seen and valued and knowing you'd made a difference. And she said, "You know what's funny? When I came here, I thought I was just teaching combat tactics. I thought it was a 1-year assignment and then I'd go home to Earth. But somewhere along the way, this became home. You both became home. Those ridiculous cubs became my children in every way that matters except biology. And I learned that love isn't about choosing. It's about expanding your capacity to care. It's about refusing to accept artificial limits on who you can value and how much you can give. And Zarix, Kyra, thank you for being brave enough to suggest something your culture had never tried. Thank you for being willing to share instead of compete. Thank you for teaching me that family can look like anything if the people involved are committed to making it work. And mostly thank you for those 6 cubs who came back covered in soap, because that was the moment I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That was the moment I chose joy over propriety, laughter over professionalism, and that choice. That willingness to let a training session become a bubble bath, become a teaching moment, become a catalyst for emotional honesty. That's very human, and I'm glad I brought that to your world. And I'm even more glad you let me stay. Kyra and Zarix's scales synchronized to the same soft blue. The color Maya had learned meant contentment and love. And all 3 of them sat watching the alien sunset. 3 people from 2 worlds who'd built something unprecedented. And when people later asked Maya how it was possible to be in a relationship with twin alien warriors who'd started as rivals, she always told them about the soap-covered cubs, about the moment she'd laughed instead of being stern, about the way joy had cracked open possibilities that duty and tradition had kept closed, about the lesson that sometimes the best thing you can do is refuse to choose when choosing would hurt people you care about. And that refusal, that insistence on finding a third option, that's the most human thing there is. That's what makes humans special in the galaxy. Not our strength or our technology, but our stubborn creativity in the face of impossible situations. Our refusal to accept that good options must exclude each other. Our insistence that love can expand and grow and encompass more than any culture's rigid frameworks allow. And Maya Rodriguez, combat instructor turned accidental relationship revolutionary, she'd learned that lesson through 6 predator cubs who'd misunderstood a simple instruction and come back covered in bubbles. And that misunderstanding had led to laughter, that had led to honesty, that had led to love, that had led to transformation that rippled across an entire culture, proving that sometimes the smallest moments, the most absurd situations, the least likely scenarios become the pivot points that change everything. And all it requires is the willingness to laugh, the courage to be honest, the creativity to see options others miss, and the stubborn human insistence that when someone tells you to choose one or they'll choose for you, the right answer is always to find the option they didn't offer, to build the solution they didn't imagine, to refuse to let anyone else's limitations become your reality. And Maya, standing between two alien warriors who'd learned to stop competing and start collaborating, who'd learned that love shared was love multiplied, not divided. She embodied that truth. She lived that lesson. And in doing so, she taught an entire species that the strongest bonds aren't built through competition, but through cooperation, that the fiercest love isn't possessive but expansive, and that sometimes a human telling alien cubs to clean up and those cubs coming back, covered in soap, is exactly the kind of beautiful chaos that cracks open new possibilities and builds futures that no one could have predicted. But everyone can celebrate, and that's what humanity brings to the galaxy. Not conquest or domination, but the radical notion that there are always more options than we've been shown. That love doesn't have to follow prescribed patterns. That family can be built from the most unlikely combinations. And that the dare to choose between good options should always be met with the creative human response of choosing both, of refusing to play games designed to create losers, of insisting that everyone can win if we're willing to reimagine what winning means. And Maya, Zarix, and Kylra, the human and the twin warriors, the instructor and the commanders, the woman who laughed and the sisters who learned to share, they proved that truth every day, raising cubs who would grow up in a culture transformed by one human's refusal to choose, one human's laughter at soap-covered predators, one human's insistence that joy and discipline, strength and gentleness, competition and collaboration, different sisters and impossible love, all of it could coexist if you were creative enough and brave enough and human enough to believe that the galaxy's complexity was something to celebrate rather than something to fear. And that lesson, learned in bubbles and laughter and tears and the daily work of building something unprecedented, that was the real story, that was the real revolution, that was what changed worlds.